In Season 2 of American Horror Story Asylum, we are introduced to Lana Winters, or how Sister Jude would say, Lana Banana. Lana is an undercover journalist who commits herself to Briarcliff so she can expose the dark secrets and cruelty that is going on behind closed doors. Turns out Lana is actually inspired by a real investigative journalist named Nellie Bly, who had herself committed to New York's women's lunatic asylum on Blackwell's Island in 1887. In 1886, she moves to New York City, and she wants to work as an investigative journalist, but she finds it difficult to get a job in a male-dominated field. By 1887, she still hasn't found a job, and her frustration boils over when she storms into the office of Joseph Pulitzer, who works as a publisher at the renowned New York World newspaper. It's during this meeting that she says, give me a chance and I will give you an incredible story. Doesn't matter what it is. Impressed by her drive, Joseph says, fine, here's your assignment. Go undercover, fake your insanity, and allow yourself to be committed to the Blackwell's Lunatic Asylum for Women in an effort to expose rumored neglect and abuse. It's important to note that Blackwell was considered to be an infamous hellhole, since on the island was a prison, a smallpox hospital, an insane asylum, and a poorhouse. Knowing that this could be her big break within the journalist industry, she accepts. She dresses herself in tattered clothes and checks herself into a working-class boarding house. Think the equivalent to a dingy hostel. She checks in under her alias Nellie Brown, and she plans to make a spectacle out of herself, so this way she is committed to the insane asylum. Step 1 of the plan, Act Crazy, is she just starts to stare at people who are also staying at the boarding house and not saying anything. And when she does talk to the people, she just continues to talk about how tragic and sad the world is, because remember, this was a time where if you were depressed, they would basically consider you to be a lunatic anyways. And there, people try to be nice initially, and they ask her questions, and all she says back is, I just can't remember anything since my headache. And at night, she resists the urge to go to bed, and she just continues to stare blankly out the window. This plan worked because after one day, the woman who ran the boarding house actually reported her to the authorities. Police arrive and they bring her to the Essex Market police courtroom. There, she's brought in front of the judge and she starts speaking in a fake accent. She continues to say, I don't remember anything. Now, based off this short interaction, the judge assumes that she's Cuban. The judge orders that a doctor come to the courtroom and examine her. When the doctor arrives, she just stares at him and doesn't allow herself to blink, and that's enough for him to be like, yeah, she's nuts. The doctor then orders that she be taken to the Bellevue Hospital, and as this is happening, people are actually lining up in the street because they want to, I quote, see the crazy Cuban woman. She wasn't even Cuban. When she gets to the hospital, she notices that it's freezing because all the windows in the entire place are open, so she complains to the nurse and says, I'm cold. The nurse quickly replies, the air is good for you, number 1, and 2, you're in a place of charity, so you shouldn't expect any better. Another doctor at the hospital then comes over to examine Nellie, and he starts to ask her the hard-hitting questions to really get to the root of her problem. One of those questions being, are you a prostitute? He deems her as demented and orders that she be taken to the asylum. And then before she actually goes to the asylum itself, more people come to the hospital to witness the crazy Cuban girl. On Monday following that weekend, her and several other prisoners are taken on an old little wooden boat to Blackwell's Island. And this is when she decides, let me stop putting on an act, let me just be myself, and let's see how the staff react. When she arrives, she's put in a building that houses an estimated 300 women. And on the first night, she's placed in solitary confinement, which is actually luxury because usually there is 6 people in each room. The next morning, all prisoners are woken up at the crack of dawn, and they are forced to change into black dresses. And we're not talking cute little black dresses, we're talking old smocks. Like this. And from there, they're forced to wash their face with cold water, and then they all have to share the same community towel. And this freaks her out because as she's looking around, she sees that some of the women have horrible, grotesque skin rashes. From here, they have their hair aggressively brushed, and they all go to breakfast. During breakfast, she's given a stale piece of bread, and as she's looking down at it, it actually has a spider on it. After breakfast, all the patients have to begin their chores, including cleaning the nurses' and staff's private rooms. After chores, the women are instructed to get in 2 uniform lines, put on straw hats, and put shawls around their shoulders, and then they proceed to go out to go for their walk. And this would be the first time that Nellie sees other women who are there at the asylum who live in other halls. As she's looking around, she sees a group of women who have leather belts on with chains attached to them, and those were the people who were deemed crazy, but also violent. And then after the walk, they're brought to their sitting room where they are instructed to sit on wooden benches perfectly upright in silence for a prolonged period of time. By nightfall, Nellie is taken from her solo room from night 1 and taken to a shared room with other women. As she lay in the dark trying to fall asleep, she just hears these screams and moans and cries from all the other women who are in the facility. Specifically, in her room, there's an elderly woman who is begging out loud, pleading that God end her life. And then another woman is randomly screaming police and murder every few moments. The day that I just described would blur into 9 days for Nellie as she just does the same thing day in and day out, and throughout this process she starts to notice other abuse and neglect that is occurring to the patients. She's witnessed nurses kicking, slapping, and shoving patients. Nellie also picks up that nurses are gossiping and just making fun of the patients overall in front of them. Nellie also witnesses an experience where a woman is crying and a nurse just slaps her across the face. And then from there, the woman who was crying starts becoming even more hysterical. And so the nurse starts to choke the woman and eventually shoves her into a dark closet and locks her in there. Hours later, when Nellie sees the woman again, she is completely covered in bruises throughout her entire neck. Also, patients were only allowed to bathe once a week, and this was the only time they were able to use soap. Also, the patients were forced to use the same water among all of them. So you would have at least 50 patients go, the water would become thick and dirty, and from there they would drain it because they had to once it became really gross, and then they would just repeat the same thing. Also, when it came time to dry themselves, they had to share their towels again, and then they had to put back on their dirty clothes. If a patient was lucky enough to have a visitor, the staff would make them put on a clean outfit before seeing them. That was the only time they were given a clean outfit. As Nellie continues to interact with other patients, she quickly notices that some women there are completely sane and were just taken there because they were immigrants. But after 10 days, Nellie has had enough, and she has her friends reach out to the authorities and request that Nellie be removed from the asylum and instead be put into the care of them. Once free, Nellie would write a 6-part article series documenting the abuse that she witnessed. Over time, these articles were published into a book. Nellie was also summoned in front of a jury to answer questions about the statements that she had made, and from there, her and a few other jury members even went out to the island to see the facility themselves. But at this point, the staff at the asylum have a heads up, and they quickly start to clean the place, and they move the prisoners that Nellie met initially and essentially hide them. When Nellie's visiting, she asked the staff what happened to the woman who was from Mexico. And the staff just reply, "What are you talking about? We've never had anybody from Mexico." Basically gaslighting her to make it like, "Are you sure you should have been released because you're a psychopath?" But thanks to Nellie's investigation, New York increased their budget to $1 million per year to fund programs for the mentally insane, and also brought awareness to mental health issues, as well as highlight the abuse that victims were subjected to. And throughout the following years, she continued to work as an investigative journalist and expose additional corruption, like buying infants on the black market.